Welcome to your show Political Landscape of this Friday, 3 of November 2023. This week, Professor Chossudovsky wanted to come back on the fact that this war is a wider war in the Middle East, a false flag that could generate other false flags. Hello, Professor. How are you today?
Yes, good afternoon. Delighted to be on the program, where we're dealing with a very complex stage in our history, and I think we are at a very dangerous crossroads in our history. This objective or this operation of Netanyahu directed against the people of Palestine is far more complex than what it looks like. It is a genocide. There's no question about that. And it is very important that our governments take a position against the genocide, because otherwise they're complicit. They are complicit in what constitutes an act of either killing or killing the entire population, including children and newborns, and also, of course, or excluding them from their homeland. Now, I should mention that just a few days ago, a document which was dated October 13, it was a secret document, Israeli document by the intelligence ministry, and it was released. I mean, it was made public, and it bears the logo of the intelligence ministry of Israel, and it assesses essentially various options regarding the future of Palestine in the Gaza Strip. Now, what is fundamental is that it's a 10-page document. It is available on our website, globalresearch.ca. What it recommends is a full population transfer directed against the people of Palestine, which would mean either the evacuation of the civilian population from Gaza to the Sinai, in other words, Egyptian territory, and or of course an acts of killing. It constitutes the basis of carrying out a genocide against the people of Palestine and excluding them from their homeland, but also it's a process of outright killing of civilians. And I should mention that this project is fully endorsed by the United States of America. It's fully endorsed. And they even have their special units of the US military, which are collaborating with the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. And consequently, we are dealing with genocide against the people of Palestine, which is endorsed by a large number of governments, of Western governments, but specifically of the governments of the United States, of Britain, Germany, and more. And I think that is something that, in other words, we should confront our governments, because the new normal is not genocide. Perhaps that's what they want to instate. And I must say that there's a whole contradictory narrative with regard to anti-Semitism. Netanyahu accuses of those opposed to his agenda as being anti-Semite. What he fails to acknowledge is that Arabs in the Middle East are considered as Semites, and Arabs of Jewish descent, they're Christians or Muslims, and they have been categorized by historians as Semites from the antiquity: Hebrews, Canaanites, Arabs, Phoenicians, namely, well, the people of the Levant, but also Mesopotamia, North Africa. We have the Safavidite Jews who were expelled from Spain in the 15th, 16th centuries by the Reyes Católicos, Isabel de Castilla and Ferdinand de Aragon, and they were speaking Arabic or a mixture between Hebrew and Arabic when they were expelled by the Spanish regime at the time. Now, I should say that from the antiquity, well, and still in the current context, these populations share a common culture and a history, and their languages, including Hebrew, Arabic, which are very similar, and Aramaic, also very similar. Aramaic was the language of Jesus Christ. In other words, they cannot, when they say anti-Semitic, I know that the term goes back to the 19th century and there's a long history and all sorts of analysis in that. But when they accuse people of being anti-Semitic, they should look at themselves. Netanyahu is the #1 anti-Semitic worldwide. That really is. He is anti-Semitic because he's the #1 anti-Semite. Why? Because he's targeting population groups which are Semites and which have a common history with people of Hebrew descent. So that, I think, has to be understood. And Western politicians who support him collectively, individually, have endorsed the genocide against the people of Palestine.
Now, according to you, the notion of killing civilians has been observed since the Second World War.
All right, let me, before entering on that subject, I'd like to mention Netanyahu has a criminal record. Now, not many people in Israel, everybody in Israel knows that. But it is significant because the latest reports, which date to October, the criminal trial against the Prime Minister of Israel is ongoing. It's a procedure which started back in 2016. It's allegations of bribery, fraud, and so on. Mind you, we have many of our heads of state and heads of government which are also involved in bribery and fraud and breach of trust, although they're not necessarily object of a criminal investigation. Now, to get back to your question, the acts of genocide have been ongoing under the auspices of US-led wars since the Second World War. We can refer to the killings of civilians in Dresden at the end of World War II. Dresden, major cities in Germany, including Cologne, but also Nuremberg, Hamburg, and so on. Extensive bombings of civilians, not military targets. And that was at the time when the war was almost over. And the same thing happened in Japan. The firebombs directed against Japanese civilians in major areas, including Tokyo, and consequently, there's a whole track record. And if you go back, let's say, to the war in Iraq. Now, the war in Iraq, remember Fallujah. Well, Fallujah was very similar to what's happening now in Palestine. It was systematic attacks against civilians and small children. Everybody was the destroying the homes and houses, etc. And of course, we stood by very often without necessarily having information on these operations. But if you look at the post-war years, the United States of America has been involved in various wars, and let's say the balance sheet of those wars is something of the order of 40 million people killed, including Dresden and including the Japanese cities. But then you get to the war on Korea, the Korean War, 1950-53, and there you have at least a quarter of the population of North Korea was liquidated. And that's on record. I can quote General Curtis LeMay saying, we must have killed how many? Some 20%. He says 20%. It was more than 20%. But Curtis LeMay is on record, and so is General MacArthur. And General MacArthur actually made his statement to the U.S. Senate and expressed his disgust because this was ordered by Harry Truman. But there we are. They have. I'm not even mentioning Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but there's a record of systematic killing of civilians in all U.S. military operations going back to World War II. Now I'm getting into the issue which I think is very important. We must address the fact that we're no longer dealing with an internal genocide within the borders of Israel. We are dealing with, as you mentioned at the beginning, is that one false flag leads to another false flag. So the false flag was definitely there. The pretext for waging this war on Gaza or this attack on Gaza is part of a carefully planned Middle East war. I can say that with certitude because we've seen massive deployments. 2 aircraft carriers coming in. The U.S. President Johnson is there. These are massive transfers of weapon systems, which certainly are totally dysfunctional in regards to waging a campaign against the Palestinians who have limited capabilities of military capabilities. So these deployments are there to eventually envisage a broader Middle East agenda and specifically targeting Iran. And I can say that while we don't have access to the secret reports of the US and its allies and Israel, okay, and Israel has a bilateral relationship with the United States, but it also has a rapport which was signed many years ago with NATO. Officially, it's not a member of NATO, but unofficially, it's de facto. NATO supports it as a non-member state, and that's crucial. But in previous interventions in the Gaza Strip, and I refer, let's say, to what happened in November 2012 with what was called Pillar of Cloud. They had advanced planning of war games. They had war games prior to the launching of this operation, which involved something like 75,000 Israeli troops, but it was a generalized bombing campaign, and it was coordinated with the United States, and nobody denies it. Now, let's get back to to what's happening in terms of money. And I emphasize that all these wars ultimately, particularly the wars against war plans against Iran, which is a major producer of oil and natural gas, and which is a country of 90 million people. Well, we can go back to what was called Operation Pillar of Cloud in 2012, and we got the documents on the war games and on how this operation evolved, and it was ultimately considered to be a much broader military operation. And routinely, the U.S. military and U.S. intelligence run these scenarios. And I can say that this particular operation, which started with a false flag on October 7th, and then which was followed almost immediately by an attack, bombing attack against Gaza, the Gaza Strip, with targeting schools and hospitals, crime against humanity. But that is something which was very carefully planned, very carefully planned. And now you have the United States is in the process of approving a large amount of money to Israel. It's $14 billion of military aid to Israel as a means to helping it in its self-defense to an alleged attack of Palestine. Now, this whole, obviously, these $14 billion have another objective. I'll get to that, but it borders on ridicule because this money this money is being sent to the world's fourth military power, okay, Israel, which also has nuclear weapons, and the Palestinian forces have limited military capabilities, and they don't need $14 billion to support something which is ongoing in Palestine. They're knocking down hospitals and schools and so on, and they're doing that within the realm of their existing resources, which are tremendous. But there's another very frightening situation. Israel is an undeclared nuclear power. It has nuclear bombing capabilities. It has an active program which are not acknowledged, and it also acts in close coordination with Washington. In fact, Israel is really a U.S. It's a hub of the U.S. empire in the Middle East, and it serves particular objectives. And we know that the Biden administration has already assigned something of the order of $1.3 trillion to nuclear weapons. Now that's a lot of money now, and it's slated to go up to $2 trillion in 2030. And part of that money will also go to contributing to Israel's nuclear weapons program. As I mentioned earlier, we are at a very dangerous crossroads. I recall that goes back to the Bush administration when and that was in the context of some confrontation in the Middle East, and Dick Cheney intimated that Israel could do the dirty work for us. That's not the exact quote, but it's essentially what he meant. Israel can do the dirty war for us, and the issue is, of course, absolutely crucial, because in the case of a war which is directed against Iran, that's where the dirty work might consist of one of Israel's nuclear attacks, which will then lead to military escalation on an unprecedented level. And now I should mention, and that's very important, US military doctrine, it may be grossly mistaken, and it certainly doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in the US military intelligence establishment shares it. But if you look at the core documents of the project for the new American century, it envisages this document constitutes a framework for actually leading simultaneous theater wars in different parts of the world. In other words, we now have a war in Eastern Europe, which could escalate and lead to the unthinkable. We have the possibility of a major war in the Middle East. And then we have threats of military intervention on the part of the United States and its allies against China, but also against North Korea. So that there are essentially three major regions in the world at the moment where the United States and its allies contemplate military intervention, not consecutively, but simultaneously. I don't think that they are in a position to wage simultaneous wars in those three regions. But on the other hand, this is there, of course, to provide a certain element of lots of contracts with the military-industrial contract, with a military-industrial complex, the defense contractors, selling arms to both Ukraine as well as to Israel, selling or providing military aid. But at the same time, they're running out of weapons. Then the question is, how is this going to evolve? Because the military doctrine, which is contained in the project of the new American century, also posits the fact that they should maintain nuclear strategic superiority, namely having the United States possibly envisaging a first strike nuclear attack. And that likelihood is far more, that likelihood is a possibility in the Middle East war theater, where it would be possibly targeting Iran. And that has been on the drawing board of the Pentagon for at least 20 years. So there we are. I think we have to, first of all, we have to confront our governments and pressure them to disengage from their commitment to Israel and possibly even cancel diplomatic relations with them. If they do not do that, they are complicit in genocide, and they're also complicit in this extension of the war theater to the Middle East, which could have devastating consequences. So we are very dangerous crossroads in our history, and we must take a stance in solidarity with Palestine, but also with a view to preventing this war from extending into the broader Middle East, which could then lead us into a World War III scenario.
Thank you very much for your time this week, Professor. I would like to say a special thank to all the auditors, and thank you for your participation to share this information around yourself. Thank you.